My name's Miles. I'm 35 years old, and if I had to sum myself up in a few words, I've always been the quiet one in the family. Not the troublemaker, not the show-off, just the kid who kept to himself, stayed out of the spotlight. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just put in the work, kept my head low, and tried to be the kind of guy people could count on, especially my folks. Jason, my brother, is just a couple years older than me, but honestly, you wouldn't know it based on how differently we were treated growing up. He was the favorite, the golden boy, always flashing that charming smile, getting away with stuff no one else could. Like the time he totaled our dad's car when he was 19. Everyone just laughed it off like, boys will be boys. And when he dropped out of college, that was just him exploring his options. Meanwhile, I was clocking in after school at 16, trying to cover the cost of my own textbooks, and still got told I wasn't showing enough initiative. I didn't make a fuss back then. I let it slide. My mindset was simple. Show up, be dependable, help out when you can, and eventually that'll be enough. After college, I got a steady job in tech. Nothing fancy, but it paid the bills. I wasn't making millions or anything, but I could live on my own and help out my parents when they needed it. And by when they needed it, I mean I was pitching in every single month for years. Covered their internet bill, took care of the utilities, helped patch up the roof that one time. And every Sunday, like clockwork, I brought over groceries. After a while, it stopped being something they asked for, it was just part of the routine. A few bags of food, the basics, and I'd knock out small chores around the house. Jason, he'd show up once every few months with some over-the-top story about his latest big idea or whirlwind romance. Get mom and dad all hyped up, then vanish the second things got real again. I never said anything. Not out loud, at least. But I felt it. The little jabs. The offhand comments. Jason's always had that special spark, you know? Or, some people just aren't meant to be in the spotlight. Some folks are better as the supportive type. I let it roll off me. Told myself it was just the way they were raised. That they didn't mean anything by it. Part of me held on to this tiny hope that one day, they'd look back and see everything I'd done and finally get it. Then came the moment that cracked something inside me. It was a Saturday afternoon in April. We were having tea, just chatting, when Mom brought it up like she was telling me about the weather. No big speech. No warning. Just, oh, we finalized our will last week. Isn't that a relief? I blinked. Oh, well, good. Glad you're getting all that sorted out. She nodded, slowly stirring her tea like she was trying to remember if she'd added sugar. Then she said, plain as day, yes, we left everything to Jason, of course. Of course. He's the oldest, she added. And he's got plans, you know? Real ambitions. I didn't even have words. I laughed. One of those awkward, stunned laughs because I thought for sure I'd misheard. Wait. Everything? Like the house? The car? Savings? She nodded again. Didn't even look up. It's just easier that way. You're doing fine on your own. You don't really need anything from us. That word need hit me like a gut punch. Like all the years of helping out, the grocery bags, the roof repairs, the quiet sacrifices, didn't mean a thing. Just because I never asked for help. Because I didn't have some dramatic story to tell. I guess I thought that by not needing them, I'd earned their respect. Turns out, all it did was make me invisible. I didn't blow up. I didn't storm out. I just went home. Sat there in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. The fridge still had leftovers from their latest Sunday haul. The internet bill, their internet, had just gone up $5 that month. I hadn't even noticed. I thought about all of it. Every quiet decision where I put their needs above mine. And then I pulled out my phone, opened my bank app, and started making changes. First, I canceled the autopay for their utilities. Then I slashed the grocery budget. I deleted the little calendar reminder that said, Sunday, parents' groceries. I didn't make a big announcement. Didn't send a text or leave a voicemail. I just stopped. 3 weeks passed. I halfway expected a call, maybe a message. Nothing. Until one random Wednesday evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Dad. No greeting. No, how've you been? Just, power just got shut off. You forget to pay? I stared at it for a minute. He really thought I just forgot. Like paying their utility bills had somehow become my job. Like it was no longer their responsibility. I started to type, erased it, started again. In the end, I kept it simple. Not my house. Good luck. And that was the moment I finally saw it. How deep their entitlement went. It wasn't just that they didn't appreciate what I did. They'd built their whole world around the idea that I'd always do it. Jason was the dreamer. I was the background noise. Everything I gave them wasn't seen as generosity, it was expected. Like breathing. Like turning on a faucet and assuming water's gonna come out. The silence after the text was telling. No reply. No apology. Not even a snarky thumbs up emoji. Just nothing. Not until the groceries ran out. That Sunday, I took a walk instead. Sun was shining, birds were out. It felt weird not lugging paper bags into their kitchen. But also, it felt peaceful. Like I could finally exhale. I ended up at this little cafe down the street. Treated myself to a proper breakfast for once, eggs, toast, and orange juice that wasn't on sale. Halfway through, my phone buzzed again. This time it was from Mom. Grocery day, she wrote. Just that. Not a question. Not even a reminder. More like a cue. Like she was giving me my line in a play I forgot I was in. I didn't write back. I let it sit there. Next day, she called. I didn't answer. 2 days later, another text. I know you're busy, but we're running low on everything. Can you swing by? Still, I said nothing. And that Friday? That's when Jason finally decided to give me a call. And that's when things took a turn I didn't see coming. Jason didn't blow up at me. He didn't point fingers or try to guilt trip me. No, he went for something worse. He tried to sound reasonable. Look, man, he said, his voice as smooth and polished as ever. I get it. Mom and Dad can be a lot. But they're not getting any younger. They need help. And you've always been the one who's good at that kind of stuff. I was leaning against my kitchen counter, staring out the window like maybe the view would offer me some answers. I didn't turn around when I said, they left everything to you, Jason. Every last thing. So why aren't you the one helping? There was a pause on the other end. The kind that tells you he hadn't expected me to actually say that part out loud. It's not about the will, he finally said. It's about doing what's right. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Yeah, I said dry. That's what I've been doing for the last 10 years. He let out a long sigh. Don't turn this into a money thing. I'm not, I said, and I meant it. This is about respect. And for the first time in my life, I'm giving some of that to myself. That was the last time we spoke. At least for a while. But the story didn't end there. A few days later, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, I froze, not out of guilt, but something closer to disbelief. Standing there, looking worn out and holding a plastic bag full of melting groceries, was my dad. He looked older than I remembered. Not in a dramatic way, like he'd aged overnight or something. More like life had been quietly wearing him down and now it was finally showing. His shoulders sagged a little and he didn't bark my name like he used to. He just stood there, gripping that grocery bag like it was the last bit of pride he had left. Hey, he said. That's all. Just that one word. I didn't say anything. Just held the door open without stepping aside. He sighed and shifted the bag from one hand to the other. Wasn't sure what kind of milk you drank. Got whole. That's still okay. And that's when it clicked, he thought this was a peace offering. Like a single bag of groceries could cancel out years of being overlooked. Or maybe he figured it would buy back the free labor I'd been quietly giving all those years. I stayed put. You want to come in? I asked. Not because I was trying to make amends, more like I wanted to see how far this would go. He nodded, stepping inside with the kind of hesitation that told me he knew this wasn't his space anymore. Not really. He placed the bag on the counter and stood there awkwardly, hands stuffed in his pockets, trying to act like he was seeing my place for the first time. Even though he'd been there more times than I could count. It's nice, he said after a beat. Clean. I looked at him. Why are you here, Dad? He gave me this look like I'd just asked him to solve a math problem in his head. Your mother, well, she's not happy. About the will thing. She didn't think it'd bother you this much. I raised an eyebrow. She didn't think disinheriting me would bother me? He rubbed his jaw and looked down at the floor. It wasn't personal. Then who was it about? I asked, my voice sharper now. Because if it was about fairness or effort or who actually shows up, don't stand there and tell me Jason earned it more than I did. He didn't answer. Just stood there in silence like the truth was too heavy to lift. Finally, he exhaled deep and long. We figured he'd need it more. You've always been solid. Reliable. You manage. Jason's still figuring things out. That word again. Need. Like I was some kind of backup generator they didn't have to check on because I never failed. Because I just kept running. That's the problem, I said quietly. You took my reliability and decided it meant I didn't need love. Or respect. He looked down like he didn't know how to respond to that. We didn't mean for it to come off that way, he said. I crossed my arms, leaning back against the wall. It didn't come off that way. It is that way. You didn't just say it, you wrote it. Signed it. Got it notarized. His eyes flicked to the bag of groceries on the counter. The power's back on, he mumbled. But barely. Had to move some things around. I gave a small nod. That's what grown-ups do. He blinked like he wasn't sure how to take that. So that's it? You're just done. That was the moment. Right there. That's when it finally sank in for him that I wasn't bluffing. That the version of me who always picked up the slack, always smiled and nodded, always came through, that guy wasn't here anymore. I didn't say anything. Just walked over to the counter, pulled the milk out of the bag, and slid it into the fridge. No words. The silence between us got heavy. He looked around the room like he was hoping it would give him an answer. We didn't expect this, he said finally, his voice low. No, I said, meeting his eyes. You expected me to keep doing everything. For free. Forever. Because you figured I wouldn't have the guts to stop. That I'd be too loyal. Too thankful. Too quiet. He didn't argue. And then I saw it just for a second. Something passed over his face. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't even regret. It was fear. Not because I was mad, but because he realized I had something he never thought I'd have, boundaries. Then the doorbell rang. He flinched, startled. I brushed past him and opened the door. There was Jason, standing on my porch with his hair perfectly styled, sunglasses pushed up on his head, sleeves rolled up like he'd just come from some investor lunch that probably never happened. Hey, he said, flashing that same smooth grin. Dad said you were being stubborn. I clenched my jaw. You've got to be kidding me. He held up his hands like I was overreacting. Look, I get it. You're upset. Fair enough. But this isn't how family handles stuff. Family? I repeated, crossing my arms. Interesting. I didn't know I still counted as family. He walked in like he owned the place, no invitation needed, and flopped down onto my couch like it was his. Gave the room a once-over. Come on, man. It's just paperwork. The will can be updated. What matters is we move forward. I shut the door behind me slower than necessary. Move forward, I repeated. Yeah, he said. After years of me doing everything while you played dress-up businessman and called it ambition? Jason let out a too loud laugh. Man, you always take everything so personally. Dad stood behind me, arms folded like he was trying to mediate a debate instead of face the truth. Can't we all just sit down and talk this through like adults? He asked. And that's when something inside me just settled. Something cool. Still. Final. I am an adult, I said, steady. That's the difference. I've been one for a long time. I just finally stopped letting you treat me like a kid. Jason leaned forward and his voice dropped into that tone people use when they think they're being the reasonable one. So what now? You're cutting us off? Is that really the kind of person you want to be? I didn't answer right away. I walked over to the fridge, opened it, and pulled out the carton of milk they brought like it meant something. You want to know what kind of person I am? I asked, placing it on the counter with a quiet thud. I looked at both of them right in the eye. I'm the kind of person who finally figured out his own worth. Who spent years being treated like an afterthought. And who realized that sharing a last name doesn't automatically earn you someone's loyalty. Jason looked like he was ready to argue, probably had a whole speech queued up, but I cut him off before he got the chance. You came here thinking I'd fold. That a bag of groceries and a smile could undo everything. But you're too late. Dad stepped toward me, one cautious step. So that's it? He asked. I nodded once. Yeah, that's it. And then I did something they truly didn't see coming. I opened the door. Not in a dramatic, movie scene kind of way. No slamming, no yelling. I opened it because, simply put, they didn't belong here anymore. Not in my home. Not in my peace. Not in this new version of my life. Jason stood up slowly, trying to keep his cool. You'll regret this, he said. No, I replied. You will. Dad looked back at me like maybe he was still searching for the right thing to say. But in the end, he said nothing. He just followed Jason out. The door clicked shut behind them with a quiet finality. And for the first time in my adult life, the silence that followed didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. The days that came after that were strangely calm. You'd think cutting off your parents and your brother in one afternoon would stir something up, neighbors talking, extended family buzzing, some kind of ripple effect. But nope. Nothing. Just quiet. For a little while, I even let myself believe maybe they'd gotten the message. Maybe it finally hit them. Maybe they were sitting in that cold, quiet house, looking around and realizing just how much I'd been holding together. But of course, it wasn't that simple. It started small. A couple of distant relatives, folks I hadn't seen since some wedding in 2012, started liking Jason's cryptic Facebook posts. The kind of passive-aggressive stuff people post when they want to look like the victim without telling the whole story. Things like, some people would rather burn bridges than show up when it matters, or you forget who really needs you when you're always the one giving. The usual guilt trip disguised as wisdom. Made sense if you already had the story backwards. Then came the messages. One night, my cousin Jenna messaged me out of nowhere. "Hey, I heard there's some drama with the fam. Everything okay?" I kept it brief. Just needed some space. She replied with a thumbs up, then added, "Hope it works out. I know your parents love you." That part hit harder than I expected. They love you. Maybe they do. But love without respect? That kind of love doesn't mean much. Not when it's laced with conditions. Not when it plays favorites and calls it doing what's best. By the second week, I got a missed call from my mom. No voicemail, just a hang up. The next morning, she sent a text. "We haven't heard from you. Hope you're not still upset." Still upset. Like I'd thrown a tantrum. Like I was sulking. Not like I was reclaiming something that had been slowly, quietly taken from me over the years. I didn't respond. Instead, I focused on my own life for the first time in what felt like forever. I started small. Reorganized my apartment. Signed up for that cooking class I'd been putting off because I was always too busy. Took a weekend trip to the coast, nothing fancy, but it was mine. And it felt good not to plan my time or budget around anyone else's needs for once. I started to remember what it was like to actually live for myself. But the peace didn't last forever. About 3 weeks after that final conversation, I got a letter in the mail. It wasn't a bill and it wasn't junk. It was a formal envelope, hand-addressed in my mother's careful, looping handwriting, the kind she always used for Christmas cards. Inside was a note. No greeting. No, love Mom and Dad. Just this. If this is how you want things to be, we understand. But don't forget, family is forever. And when we're gone, you'll have to live with how you treated us. I read it once. Then again. And a third time, just to be sure. And then I almost laughed. There it was, the guilt. Not an apology. Not a shred of self-awareness. Just one last attempt to reel me back in with shame. To make me feel guilty for daring to put myself first. And the craziest part? I hadn't even treated them badly. I didn't scream. I didn't go online and tell the world what they did. I didn't write some bitter post. All I did was stop. I stopped sacrificing myself for people who saw my effort as expected. Who treated my support like it came with the furniture. I stared at the letter for a long time. Didn't tear it up. Didn't frame it either. I slipped it back into the envelope and filed it away in a folder in my cabinet labeled Family. Not for sentiment. Just for the reminder. Later that weekend, I was walking through the local farmer's market when I ran into Mrs. Ellison, our old neighbor from back on the street where I grew up. She recognized me right away. "Danny," she said, her voice like sunshine breaking through clouds. "My goodness, look at you." We chatted for a few minutes, just the usual neighborly small talk, catching up on life. Then she asked how my parents were doing. I hesitated for a beat. "They're figuring some things out," I said carefully. She gave me a look, something between knowing and concerned. "You know, I saw your mom last week. She mentioned you'd been a little distant lately. Said you were going through something." Then she smiled gently. I just told her, well, he's always been the one holding everything together. Give the boy a break. I smiled back. And for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel fake. Mrs. Ellison had always seen more than she let on. That much I'd known for years. But what she said next caught me off guard. "Oh, and your mom mentioned something about selling the house," she said, almost like it was an afterthought. "Said Jason's taking care of it all." I felt my chest tighten. "Selling the house?" I repeated, trying to keep my voice even. She nodded slowly. "Yeah," said they couldn't keep up with the expenses. "Jason has some real estate contact helping out." She sounded unsure, like even she didn't fully buy it. I stood there for a few seconds, letting it sink in. That house wasn't just property, it was childhood memories. It was holidays, scraped knees, Sunday mornings, decades of history. And now Jason, who hadn't contributed a dime, was somehow in charge of unloading it? I thanked her, made some polite exit line I barely remember, and walked home a lot faster than I'd planned. As soon as I stepped through my front door, I went straight to my laptop and started digging. Public property listings. Real estate databases. Anything that could confirm what she just told me. And there it was, listed 2 days ago. A modest 3-bedroom on Hawthorne Lane. The description read, "Charming family home with potential." Sold as is. Contact Ethan R for details. I just stared at the screen. So that was the game. The moment I stopped being useful, they didn't regroup or try to figure out how to live within their means. They handed the whole thing over to Jason. Again. The same Jason who'd fumbled every business idea he ever touched. The same guy who called me ungrateful for finally setting boundaries. And now he was selling off the house I'd helped maintain for years. The cherry on top? The listing photos. The kitchen had fresh tile work, a new backsplash, repainted cabinets, small upgrades, but enough to suggest they'd had the money to spend. Just not on the things that mattered when I was still footing the bills. They weren't broke. They were just betting I'd never stop filling in the gaps. But they were wrong. They'd burned that bridge. And now they were going to learn something they should have figured out a long time ago. Ethan Wright been the star of the show, the talker, the visionary, the golden child, but I was the one who knew where the gears actually turned. I kept the records. I had the receipts. And while they thought I'd never push back, they forgot what happens when the quiet one finally speaks up. I wasn't going to let him sell that house without resistance. Not after being written out of everything like I never mattered. So I opened my own filing cabinet, pulled out the folder labeled maintenance receipts, and started planning. The next 48 hours were a blur of sorting through documents, bank statements, contractor invoices, emails, utility bills, and the written agreement from when I lent them 10 grand to fix the roof. Back then, it had felt casual. Just something to have on paper, just in case. We joked over dinner. We laughed about it. I wasn't laughing now. Most people don't realize what it means to be the one holding everything together until you stop. They don't see how many strings you're pulling until you let go and the whole thing collapses. Jason hadn't seen it. My parents hadn't either. The next morning, I reached out to a real estate attorney. Explained the situation straight. My parents were trying to sell their home, one I'd spent over a decade financially supporting, after cutting me out of their will. I wasn't asking to own it, but I wanted to challenge the situation legally. Because what I gave them wasn't a favor. It wasn't charity. It was structured. Routine. Expected. If they wanted to treat me like a silent investor, well, they were about to find out what happens when that investor starts talking. The lawyer replied that same day. I had a case. Not to take ownership, but to dispute the proceeds from the sale based on equitable interest. And with the documentation I had, it was strong. Utility payments, food expenses, contractor receipts, and that roof loan, it all added up. I can file a notice of interest to put a temporary hold on the sale, he said. It won't block it forever, but it forces a legal response. Leverage. That was the word that stuck with me. By the end of the week, the notice was filed. Less than 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Jason. You filed a what? He snapped. No hello. No lead-in. A notice of interest, I said calmly. It's a formal declaration that I have a financial stake in the property. You've got to be kidding me. I'm not. He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. You think just because you bought some groceries. 15 years, I cut in. 15 years of bills, repairs, food, and emergencies. While you were off playing startup CEO in Miami. Silence. I'm not doing this to take the house, I added. I'm doing this because I'm not going to let you sweep me out of the picture and then turn around and profit from everything I built. This is petty, he muttered. No, Jason. Petty would have been torching the garage and mailing you the ashes. This is called accountability. He didn't respond. Just hung up. The next message came from Mom. I don't know what you're doing, Miles. This isn't you. Funny how people say that when you stop letting them walk all over you. Like my whole personality was supposed to be defined by how much I could endure without breaking. But that was the thing. This was me. The real me. The one who finally saw through the roles they'd cast me in. Not the backup plan. Not the helper. Not the dependable ghost who showed up with groceries and disappeared before dinner. The version of me they thought they knew? He's gone. And this new one? He doesn't go quietly. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I was acting like I actually mattered. Like someone who deserved more than scraps handed out in the name of family. Like a man who finally stopped accepting crumbs just to keep the peace. Then, after weeks of silence, almost a full month, they showed up. Not Jason. My parents. No call. No text. No letter soaked in guilt. Just them. Standing there on my front porch. Like ghosts from a life I'd outgrown. But this time, they didn't bring groceries. They didn't wear polite smiles. And they sure weren't riding in on that quiet cloud of superiority they usually carried with them. I opened the door slow, unsure of what I'd see. My dad looked like he hadn't slept in a few days. My mom's eyes were puffy, like maybe she'd been crying on and off and hadn't told anyone why. They stood there like a couple of kids outside the principal's office, unsure whether they were about to get scolded or sent home with a second chance. "We need to talk," my dad said, voice low. I didn't invite them in. Instead, I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and leaned back on the porch railing. My space was still mine, and they didn't get to walk back in like nothing had changed. "I want to start," my mom said, her voice trembling a little. "We messed up. Badly. You've been nothing but good to us, Miles. For years. And we just assumed you'd always be there." "Because I always was," I said, flat. She nodded, slow. "Exactly. You were so steady that we stopped even noticing. We stopped appreciating it." I looked at her, then at my dad, who hadn't taken his eyes off her since she started talking. Probably hoping she'd say all the right things so he wouldn't have to. "And the will?" I asked. Dad cleared his throat, stepping in. "We didn't mean for it to hurt you. It wasn't meant as a punishment. We just thought Jason needed more help than you did." "Well," I said, "you thought wrong." He sighed, deep and heavy. "We see that now." I didn't rush to respond. I let the silence hang there, let them sit in it. I wasn't after another apology. I'd heard plenty of those in my life. What I wanted was action. Change. "We'll update the will," my mom said. "Split everything fairly. You'll be included." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean 50-50? She hesitated. "Just for a beat?" "Well, we were thinking maybe." 50-50, I repeated. "Or the legal notice stays in place and I make sure every potential buyer knows exactly how much I invested in that house. Every single dollar." My dad swallowed hard. You could hear it. 50-50, he said. I gave a single nod. "And Jason's out of the deal. He doesn't sell the house. He doesn't profit unless I approve the terms. Period." They looked at each other. I could see it, the old habits wanting to rise up. That need to protect their favorite. But this time something was different. There was pride on their faces, sure. But beneath it? Regret. Maybe fear. And for the first time in my entire life, something closer to respect than anything I'd ever seen from either of them. Then my mom looked at me, steady and quiet, and said the three words I never thought I'd hear. "You're right, Miles." And just like that, the tide turned. They updated the will. I had it reviewed by a separate lawyer, one of my choosing. We had it notarized. No backdoors. No fine print. The house sale was paused indefinitely and nothing moved forward unless I gave the green light. Jason didn't take it well. He threw a fit, tried to guilt them into backing him again. He played the usual cards, talked about potential, vision, how I was being selfish. But this time, they didn't budge. Because when you lose the one person you've leaned on the most, you learn real quick not to take them for granted again. And me? I didn't do any of this to settle a score. This wasn't revenge. It was about reclaiming something I'd slowly lost over the years, piece by piece, Sunday by Sunday. Somewhere along the line, I stopped being a person in their eyes and became something else entirely. A utility. A credit card that cooked and carried bags. A quiet helper who didn't make a fuss. But not anymore. These days, I live in the quiet I built for myself. It's not lonely, it's calm. It's mine. I still take walks on Sundays. But I don't spend them unloading groceries in someone else's kitchen. Now, I cook for me. I invest in me. And when I pick up a carton of milk, it's for my fridge. My home. Not to keep someone else's lights on.